Good day, this is Laura Bomi, and I will be focusing my ethical theory presentation on prima facie duties and ethical standards. Prima facie duties as an ethical theory was initiated by W.D. Ross, who was a British philosopher at Oxford University. He was familiar with forms of utilitarian thinking and understood Kant's theories. However, he wasn't satisfied with either of these and recognized that each could be correct some of the time, but they also had gaps. The deontological duty theory he developed in the 1930s combined aspects of both utilitarian and Kantian thinking and was very influential in the 20th century. What you will find in this theory is hopefully you're starting to get a better sense of ethical pluralism and how one single theory that says you have one single choice is not really a theory that can be applied widely in all cases. And so W.D. Ross expanded his own concern around other theories of the time and built this prima facie duties theory. The ethics of prima facie duties is related to his belief that a non-absolutist version of ethical pluralism existed. A prima facie duty is an excellent, permanent, non-absolute reason to do or refrain from something. So it gives us some flexibility. So hopefully some of you, as you're reading this theory, are starting to feel like you connect with it at some level. Ross's view was we have many prima facie duties, each is fundamental to us, and each can be outweighed by competing reasons on any particular occasion. So this goes back to our study already on ethical pluralism, that there isn't just one way of doing things to consider our moral duty or a moral good. And so prima facie duties essentially focused on the idea of duty. What is our duty? The list of prima facie duties are as follows. Reparations, which is repairing harm that we have done. Gratitude, appropriately acknowledging benefits that others have given us. Justice, ensuring that virtue is rewarded and vice punished. Beneficence, enhancing the intelligence, virtue, or pleasure of others. Self-improvement, making oneself more intelligent or virtuous. Fidelity, keeping our promises, being faithful to our word. And non-maleficence, preventing harm to others. Again, as you look at these, you probably can relate to all of these in some way, shape, or form and say, yes, that makes sense. One of the other things I want to share with you, and I shared in this module that we're studying at this time, is the CAS Statement of Shared Ethical Principles. So this CAS Statement of Shared Ethical Principles is much like prima facie duties. And so I'm going to interweave it here in my presentation for you to get a better sense of these particular standards as well, because you may come into contact with them in higher education, because this is a statement related to higher education. Principle 1 is autonomy. We take responsibility for our actions and both support and empower an individual's and groups' freedom of choice. Principle 2, non-malfeasance. We pledge to do no harm. Principle 3, beneficence. We engage in altruistic attitudes and actions that promote goodness and contribute to the health and welfare of others. Principle 4, justice. We actively promote human dignity and endorse equality and fairness for everyone. Principle 5, fidelity. We are faithful to an obligation, trust, or duty. Principle 6, veracity. We seek and convey the truth in our words and actions. Principle 7, affiliation. We actively promote connected relationships among all people and foster community. I think if you look at these in light of your master's program and adult education, these should and hopefully do speak strongly to you in terms of your desire to be an adult educator. And let's go ahead and look at these and compare. So prima facie duties versus the CAS ethics. So prima facie duties, I tried to compare them here so that you might see how they do match up. There isn't anything that specifically says that these were drawn from prima facie duties, but when I was studying this, I personally found them both very easy to understand, and I could connect with them, and they resonated with me. So I put these together. You might, in your own way, put them together in a different manner, but just for the sake of this conversation and this video, I'll go through them. So prima facie duties, self-improvement, and the CAS ethical standard of autonomy. This is a focus on individual behavior. So our ability to improve ourselves, have autonomy to do so, to be able to have freedom within our own area of expertise to improve or in our own lives. Reparations and non-maleficence from a prima facie duty perspective, and non-malfeasance. So you'll see they're spelled differently, non-maleficence versus non-malfeasance. They're essentially synonyms, and the idea here is focusing on doing no harm. And reparations I put in that grouping because reparations is making repair for something that you did do harm. So gratitude and beneficence are prima facie duties, and beneficence is the CAS ethical standard. And the focus is on doing and recognizing good. So that would be gratitude is more on recognizing the good things, and beneficence is focus on doing good. Justice is one they both share, which is a focus on equality and fairness. The prima facie duty of fidelity and veracity versus the CAS ethical standard of fidelity. This is a focus on truth and obligation. So that would say the idea of veracity, the idea of veracity is being truthful and honest. And the last one here, affiliation, is not one that is in prima facie duties, but I think you can understand how it might have grown over the last number of years and be important in education, which is a focus on community. And I think it is important that we consider how both of these can work together. And as you learned about this theory, I'm curious how much you may have thought about, oh, I really get this, or I understand it, or I've seen this, or this is something that I feel. I generally feel like I want to do good. I want the ability to make choices. I want to focus on my community or be a part of my community. So here are some outcomes I would like you to consider. What do you think about these particular stances that are supported by both prima facie duties and CAS ethical standards? When professionals act in accordance with ethical principles, program quality and excellence are enhanced, and ultimately individuals are better served. And number two, as professionals providing services in education, we are committed to upholding these shared ethical principles for the benefit of our students, our professions, and education. For me personally, I think this holds up quite nicely. I know that I work in a community college, and I have taught, and I'm also on the administration side. I work in HR, I've developed trainings, and in all of these areas, I think my credibility as a educational leader or teacher or instructor is enhanced when I demonstrate ethical principles, like that I care, or I build community, or that I'm truthful in what I do. And I do hope that as an instructor, I've been able to convey that during this course to you, that I do care about you. I want you to have autonomy about making choices about what you study and your expressions, and also to make sure that you feel treated fairly. So just consider this in your own professions as you are going forward and growing your skills. Now, the advantages of prima facie view are that it accommodates a sense there is more than a single fundamental ethical consideration. This is incredibly important, and that is why this particular theory has taken off, is that there's more than one way to consider things. It explains why we are sometimes permitted to break the moral rules, because they are non-absolute. So prima facie would say that rules are not absolute, and that we need to make decisions based on considering the context of the situation. It explains the existence of moral conflict. We will have conflict. If you compare it to other theories, a lot of times some of the decisions are based on not having any conflict. But this one says it's okay. Focuses on natural intuitive tendencies to be good, to do no harm, to be honest, and to connect with others. Again, this is maybe why you might resonate with this particular theory. But this is kind of like a list of very basic commandments that we might have learned in kindergarten or along the way in our life, being our values that we're being taught by our families. Explains why regret is sometimes appropriate, even when one has done something wrong, or done nothing wrong, excuse me. When you've done nothing wrong, you sometimes might feel regret because you've had to make a hard choice between two things, one of them being kind of good and one being kind of bad, but you've made a choice. Now, prima facie view versus other theories. So this prima facie is capable of offering more satisfying answers to moral conflicts than either utilitarian or Kantian theories. And I hope you're finding this in your study. So utilitarians usually have to say that when an action produces greatest happiness, it is right, even if it is harmful. Ross's theory, so prima facie, would say that an action producing the greatest happiness may not be right, depending on the harm it may do. So this may be the duty of non-maleficence, which takes precedent or is more stringent. Kant's theory must say that lying is wrong, even if it can be beneficial. But Ross's theory would say that a lie may not be wrong, depending on the benefit. And this is the duty of beneficence, which may be more stringent or more beneficial. Here is an example. Ross's theory has been most useful for helping medical professionals, educators, social workers, and business people to understand basic moral principles that apply in their practices. So think of an example whereby, let's use somebody that is homeless, let's say, and that person, I had a time once where I saw somebody that was homeless, and I went to give them food, and they didn't want food. They didn't want anything from me. They just wanted to be by themselves. So how should I behave if I'm trying to do a good thing, a thing that would be called beneficence, and yet the person is rejecting it because that is their own choice and autonomy? So you might see these in various situations where something that we perceive as good might violate someone's autonomy, or we might have to take over somebody's autonomy at times because they are in fact making poor choices. The disadvantages of prima facie view are it relies on people to recognize their own intuition and autonomy. So we have to be able to make these choices and work through a dilemma or a conflict. It does not promote a single view like absolutism. It actually says you have to think and use some of your intuition. It does not promote one ethical outcome. So it doesn't promote, let's say, just happiness or absolutism. It doesn't tell us exactly what to do to be ethical. Lastly, it requires context to make ethical decisions. So how do I know? So here's one of the things. How do we know the fundamental rules? We keep coming back to this question. So in our study this term. And the conflict of prima facie duties would say when a theory presents multiple principles, it is almost always possible that in certain circumstances, some of those principles will generate conflicting duties. So two questions. How do we know what our prima facie duties are? How do we know what to do when our prima facie duties conflict? An example, I gave you one, but here are a number of others to think. It is our duty to help people in need. And if it is our duty not to harm other people, we might find ourselves in a situation where we can help someone in need by harming someone else. The one duty tells us we ought to do the helping action, and the other duty tells us we ought not to do it. So what do? So prima facie insists that the fundamental moral rules are self-evident. So this idea of self-evidence is relying on our intuition. A claim is self-evident just in case it is true. It may or may not be true, but just in case it is true, and adequately understanding it is enough to make you justified in believing it. So some examples: lying, mandatory reporting, do no harm, addiction, homelessness. So let's use mandatory reporting. So when you are working, let's say, with a student, a young person or someone, or even in a profession such as HR, and somebody tells you something about sexual harassment, you have a requirement to mandatorily report that, and it may in fact violate the person's rights who told you. So these are the kinds of things that prima facie would say, what is the greatest thing that we can do? Well, do no harm is that thing. The role and judgment of autonomy, as I mentioned, when our fundamental duties conflict, prima facie insists there is not a mechanical procedure to decide. We must rely on our best judgment and what feels right. And we can't always be certain what's right, and we need autonomy to choose. Consider in your post to the presentation how you have exercised your prima facie duties and are the CAS ethical standards to resolve a moral dilemma. That is the thing I would like you to consider as you look back on prima facie and the CAS ethical standards. How will you rely on your best judgment and what feels right? And you may not always know what the right thing is, and so how do you exercise autonomy to make a choice? Thank you for your time, and I wish you all the best, and I hope this helped you understand these duties.